What would you be secretly relieved not to do? Several months ago, I became a bit obsessed with understanding human design, HD, a neo-typology that has emerged in the last 40 years combining Jewish Kabbalah with the Chinese I Ching and Vedic astrology. While I do wonder if it was an immaculate conception born of countercultural revolution, LSD, and the bohemian refuge of 1970s Ibiza, the founder Ra Uru lived there during his, quote, revelation, end quote, it has stimulated me to try to live in a more embodied way. That is, to make decisions with an additional body level awareness rather than just the exclusivity of the mind. Through my explorations, I discovered Jenna Zoe's podcast Align, where she shared a fascinating tool for decision making that I want to share with you today. Zoe's tool is a question that you can use when you're facing a decision, and it's the title of this post. What would you be secretly relieved not to do? It aims to identify the deeper knowing within ourselves to empower us to make decisions in a more coherent way. Uniquely, such decisions are not always, quote, type 1 decisions, all or nothing situations. They may be as basic as, should I go to this event or stay home? Do I want to meet up with this person? Do I want to continue this course? The theory being an aligned life is a product of aligned decisions. Not unlike getting to a given destination requires you to follow a given set of right directions. In other words, no wrong turns at Albuquerque. If you're facing one of these situations, the question Zoe suggests to ask yourself is, what would you be secretly relieved not to do? Which can trigger turmoil in a large number of people, including myself. And today we're going to explore why. Many human beings resist asserting their authentic wants and desires. We fear upsetting harmony or group dynamics because exile, often historically and to some degree presently, threatens survival. My guess is that a Big Five assessment done of our entire human collective might reveal a majority skew towards agreeableness, given our high sociality as human beings. But group or tribe harmony, while useful, is often a natural compression function to authentic and individual choice. To avoid conflicts, participants agree to abide by a set of practices or protocols to remain uniform and aligned. Jung discusses part of this dilemma in his short work entitled The Undiscovered Self. Apart from the agglomeration of huge masses in which the individual disappears anyway, one of the chief factors responsible for the psychological mass-mindedness is scientific rationalism, which robs the individual of his foundations and his dignity. As a social unit, he has lost his individuality and becomes a mere abstract number in the Bureau of Statistics. As we discussed in the post on Who Are You When You Stop Becoming, roles are parameterizations that create a sense of the known and perceived safety to the mind. It is easier to reason and act on a perceived ordered ensemble than to reason and act on a group of random and opposing members. Said in a different way, if you want to know what decision-making monkey you need to influence in a monkey tribe in order to get those precious bananas that you want, you need to know whether the monkey tribe is even structured or agrees on whether or not there is a decision-making monkey at all. Otherwise, your efforts are in vain. The perimeter in versus out group messaging are subtle programs that shape our decisions and therefore lives every day. Without awareness to these programs, we risk becoming hostages to them. And here, Zoe's question becomes a useful one for a few key reasons. The question is a clever probe for 3 reasons. It triggers a preference revelation, our emotional information system, and uses negation to get to the heart of our true desires. First, Zoe asks us to introspect in secret. Secret is a beautiful code word because it allows you and gives you the permission to differentiate between your stated versus revealed preferences. In other words, we draw the line between preference we think we must have and need to express in order to remain within harmony of the group from our real preferences, which are often revealed in actions. Second, Zoe uses the wonderful and felt emotion to ground the body, relief. Because we know what it is like to live under the influence of gravity, we have a firm intuition for the feeling of being encumbered and burdened by a weight, both physically and psychologically. When we are handling conflicting desires, in other words, the tribe-stated preferences to our individual revealed actions that we really want, psychologically we feel the weight in ourselves of the tension. Therefore, relief sparks a body-level awareness of an affinity towards a given choice. It's easy to imagine what it might feel like to feel relieved of a trouble, and it's a little bit more difficult to imagine what it might feel like to be happy or aligned. Finally, Zoe uses via negativa, or the negative way, to get resolution on our true desire. Via negativa is an approach used to define something by what it is not, instead of what it is. In this case, we are attempting to gain resolution on something that is inherently unknowable, ourselves. To understand this, let's take a side alley adventure to understand why negation can be more elucidating than affirmation. Negativity bias is a concept supported by the research of Kahneman and Tversky in 1979 in their studies across loss aversion. The idea is that, as humans, from an evolutionary bias towards reproduction and survival, we tend to pay greater attention to what will hurt us rather than what will help us, and avoid loss over potential gain. Neurologically and physiologically, it is suggested by other studies that negative stimuli tends to activate the amygdala, the brain's fear and threat center, more strongly than positive stimuli activates our reward centers. This heightened activation suggests negative experiences could be processed more intensely. Therefore, it can be easier to identify what we would not want to happen rather than what we do want. All in all, these properties make it a useful tool to consider, but not without its own challenges. It's important to note that, due to our cognitive and fixed mindset biases, in addition to sloth, what we feel we might want might also be keeping us from growing in a direction that could ostensibly benefit our lives too. In other words, our loss aversion might push us away from growth, even if we could benefit from it too. For example, if you really want to get a promotion, it might require you to take on more responsibility without reward for a little while, which intrinsically might not trigger relief in the decision-making process. This is one wrinkle of self-deception I struggle with the intrinsic nature of this question. While there is a nauseating and open discussion we could have about, well, is getting the promotion really what you want, or is that more just social conditioning? I leave that for a different time. That would require us to go into the world of unbounded metaphysical questions. All in all together, however, I still think Zoe's question is a useful tool that I do find myself using more frequently day to day when conflicted about a given decision. I do think it requires a certain amount of faith or trust in yourself that you build up through reps, or at least an openness towards experimentation. But it's at least helpful in trying to deploy in low-stakes decisions. In doing so, you might discover more about your true preferences and tap into your self-trust than you might have otherwise ever been able to.